Here at Methodist Hospital, newsmen were aware of published reports that the body of someone called Howard Hughes was inside the pathology department. But those were just reports. It hadn't been confirmed. And as of 1:15, those reports were still not...
When his body reached the morgue in Houston, nobody could say for certain who he was. The richest man in America weighed barely 90 pounds. His hair fell past his shoulders, uncut for years. His nails had curled into claws. His teeth had gone dark in his mouth, and his skin had the pale, papery look of a man who had not seen sunlight in a very long time. Investigators had to call in fingerprint experts just to confirm his identity, because nothing about his face matched the man the world remembered. He was 70 years old. 40 years earlier, this same man had been the most celebrated pilot in the country. He had built a plane with his own hands and flown it faster than any human being alive. He had circled the entire planet in under 4 days and come home to a parade so large it stopped the streets of New York. Congress gave him a gold medal before he turned 35. Hi viewers, before we go further, I want to ask you something simple. If you had unlimited money and unlimited freedom, do you think you could stay in control of yourself? Drop a quick yes or no in the comments below. And if you don't want to miss the next story like this one, make sure you're subscribed. Because what happened to this man is not really a story about wealth. It is a story about a mind that was never taught where to stop. He built movie studios, he owned an airline, he dated the most famous women in Hollywood. Then, piece by piece, he disappeared. Not all at once, not with one single moment anyone could point to and say, this is where it began. By the time he died, he had not been seen in public for over a decade. He was sealed behind blacked-out windows in a hotel penthouse, surrounded by a small circle of men who controlled every door between him and the outside world. They decided what he ate. They decided who was allowed to know where he was. Some of them, by the end, may have decided more than that. The same mind that built an empire worth $2.5 billion also built the prison that ended him. And the strangest part of this story is that the prison and the empire were never two separate things. They were built from the exact same material. This is the story of how a boy taught to fear the world turned that fear into genius, how that genius gave him more power than almost any man alive, and how, slowly, without anyone ever quite noticing the moment it happened, that same power turned back on him until there was nothing left to control but himself. His mother was afraid of the air itself. Aline Gano Hughes checked every meal her son ate, every child he played with, every surface his hands touched. She was convinced that disease moved invisibly through the world, riding on doorknobs and handshakes, waiting for the one mistake that would take the only child she had. Houston in the early 1900s was a genuinely dangerous place to raise a boy. Childhood illness took children quickly and without warning, but even by the standards of that fear, hers went further than most mothers of her time. By the time young Howard understood what a germ even was, he had already absorbed something deeper than the lesson itself. He had learned that the world outside his own control could not be trusted. That belief never left him. It would simply change shape over the decades, wearing different costumes, but never disappearing. His father, meanwhile, had come to East Texas chasing an oil strike, drilling for crude with the same dull, blunt tool every wildcatter used. It worked in soft earth. It failed completely against hard rock. His father did not. He designed something new, a drill bit built from 2 interlocking steel cones, each one studded with cutting edges that could chew through rock the old tool could never touch. It was not a small improvement. It changed what the ground could give up. And he made one decision that turned a clever invention into a fortune. He never sold the bit. He leased it. Every well drilled with it, anywhere in the country sent money back to one company in Houston. It was a machine that printed cash quietly, continuously, year after year, completely detached from anything its owner had to actively do. Howard grew up surrounded by that money, but strangely uninterested in how it was made. What fascinated him instead was how things worked. At 12, he built a working radio out of spare parts. When his mother refused him a motorcycle, he simply attached an engine to his bicycle and rode it through the neighborhood anyway. At 14, he took his first flight in an airplane, and from that day on, he rarely talked about anything else. A hereditary hearing condition made crowds uncomfortable and ordinary conversation exhausting. It pushed him again and again toward machines instead of people. Machines never needed to be heard, they simply needed to be understood. Then, within the span of 18 months, his entire world collapsed. His mother died during a routine surgical procedure. He was 16 years old. His father followed less than 2 years later, dead suddenly of a heart attack at 54. The boy had lost both parents before he could legally sign his own name on most documents. And in losing them, he had inherited an empire. He was 18 when he walked into a courtroom and asked a judge to declare him a legal adult, years ahead of schedule. He convinced his relatives to sell him their remaining shares of the family company. Before he turned 19, he controlled it outright. No one was left who could tell him no. Not a parent, not a guardian, not a board of directors. Just a teenager, an unlimited stream of money, and absolutely nothing standing between his impulses and the world. He left Houston almost immediately and moved to Los Angeles, carrying a checkbook that could outspend any film studio in the city, and no experience whatsoever making a movie. He didn't think he needed experience. He had money and a refusal to accept that anything was impossible. His early war film about pilots in the First World War cost nearly $4 million to complete, a figure no studio in Hollywood history had dared spend at that point. 3 stunt pilots died during filming. He kept going anyway. He fought censors for months over a gangster picture so violent they tried to cut it apart before release. He won that fight, and the film reached audiences largely the way he wanted it. A few years later, he built an entire marketing campaign around a single actress's image, using photographs so provocative that censors pulled the film from theaters within a week. He waited 3 years, then re-released it without their approval at all and let the scandal sell the tickets for him. He moved through Hollywood's most famous women with the same restless hunger he brought to everything else. One lived with him for a stretch before discovering he was involved with several other people at the same time and walked away. Another, fiercely independent, had a relationship with him that by multiple accounts turned violent on both sides. Others came and went across 3 decades, drawn in by his attention and money, and eventually worn down by both. By the late 1940s, he had bought a controlling stake in one of Hollywood's 5 major film studios, and then, almost methodically, he broke it. He fired executives without warning. He delayed productions for months over disagreements nobody else considered serious. At one point, he simply shut the entire studio down and left it dark, with actors and crews sitting under contract with nothing to film. People who could avoid working with him did exactly that. He would eventually sell the studio for a personal profit, walking away from the wreckage he had created, on to the next obsession. Because the films were never really what kept him in California. The planes were. He built them inside a rented hangar, and unlike the films, he didn't simply fund the planes from a distance. He sat at the drafting table with his own engineers, arguing over wing shape and engine numbers until the math finally satisfied him. On a September afternoon in 1935, he climbed into an aircraft he had personally helped design and flew it faster than any human being had ever flown in a land plane, 352 miles an hour. 2 years later, he broke the transcontinental speed record between 2 coasts. And then, in the summer of 1938, he attempted something almost no one believed was achievable. He decided to fly around the entire planet. He flew east through fog over the Atlantic. He pushed through mechanical strain, crossing Siberia. He fought exhaustion so severe that by the final stretch, his crew could barely speak in full sentences. He landed back in New York in just over 3 days, cutting the previous record by more than half. New York gave him a ticker tape parade larger than the one given to Charles Lindbergh after his famous transatlantic crossing. He was 32 years old. For one summer, he may have been the most famous man in the entire country. Congress awarded him a gold medal. Newspapers called him the greatest aviator alive. But here is the detail almost nobody outside his closest circle ever understood. None of it paid for itself. The planes, the engineers, the fuel, the years of testing and failure behind every record, all of it was funded quietly by a drill bit invented decades earlier by a man who never lived to see what it eventually built. The freedom that gave him was absolute. He answered to no investor, no board, no one at all. And there was one more thing his fame never changed, no matter how high the stakes climbed. He never let another pilot take the risk in his place. The seat had to be his. The controls had to be in his hands every single time, without exception. In the summer of 1946, that decision very nearly killed him. The oil began leaking from the right engine about 45 minutes into the flight. He was testing a reconnaissance aircraft his company had built for the military, flying it himself over Los Angeles, exactly the way he always insisted on doing. The leak caused a propeller to reverse pitch. The drag became violent and sudden. The plane pulled hard to one side and began losing altitude fast. He fought to bring it down on a nearby golf course. He didn't reach it. The aircraft clipped the roof of one house, tore through a second, and came down in a quiet residential neighborhood already burning by the time rescuers reached it. They pulled him out alive, barely. His chest had been crushed. One lung had collapsed completely. The force of the impact had pushed his heart out of its normal position. Doctors were not confident he would survive the night. He survived. But the man who walked out of that hospital weeks later was not the same man who had gone in. The injuries left him in constant, severe pain, and the doctors managed it the only way medicine at the time knew, with codeine. It worked. It worked so well that he simply never stopped taking it. The substance that would slowly take apart his mind over the next 30 years entered his life in a hospital bed given to him by people who were only trying to save him. While he was still recovering, the United States Senate opened an investigation into his wartime military contracts. Tens of millions of taxpayer dollars spent without a single working aircraft ever properly delivered. He showed up to the hearing still healing from his injuries, and instead of playing defense, he went on the attack. Specific, combative, unwilling to give an inch to anyone in that room. Then he went back to California and did something his critics had insisted was impossible. He climbed into the cockpit of an enormous wooden flying boat, an aircraft so large that almost nobody outside his inner circle believed it would ever leave the water. He lifted it into the air. It flew for roughly a mile low over the harbor before he brought it gently back down. It never flew again. But it didn't need to. The flight had done exactly what he wanted it to do. It ended the argument in front of the cameras, in front of the senators, in front of the entire country. It was also the last time the world would ever see him fight back in public. What almost nobody recognized in that moment was that the crash had broken his body permanently, and the medicine meant to repair it had already begun quietly breaking something else entirely. The same force that once chased speed records and stared down government senators was beginning slowly to turn inward, toward darkened rooms, toward silence. When the owners of a Las Vegas hotel asked him to vacate his suite for the New Year's crowd, he didn't bother arguing. He simply bought the building. That purchase became the opening move in a buying spree that reshaped an entire city. All of it directed from behind a locked door on the 9th floor by a man who never once stepped outside to see what his own money had built. He bought hotel after hotel along the Strip. He bought a small casino for one single reason, because a rotating neon sign on its roof was shining into his bedroom window at night, and he simply wanted it switched off. He ran a Nevada empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars through one trusted aide, communicating almost entirely through telephone calls and handwritten notes. By some accounts, the two men went years without ever standing in the same room. Behind that aide stood a tighter, more private circle, men who controlled every door, every meal, every visitor that ever came near him. They opened doors using their elbows, so he would never have to touch a handle himself. He had not appeared in public since the early 1960s, and the longer he remained hidden, the stranger the world surrounding his name became. A novelist convinced one of the country's largest publishers that he had personally interviewed Hughes face to face, secured letters written in his own handwriting, and signed a deal to publish his authorized life story. None of it was real. He had never once met the man. And the scheme nearly worked because nobody alive could prove that the real Howard Hughes still existed to deny it himself. Around that same period, a government intelligence agency built an entire elaborate cover story around his name to hide a secret operation unfolding at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, knowing the public would believe almost anything as long as his name was attached to it. His legend was now operating out in the world completely on its own, without him, because the actual man behind that name had not left a sealed room in years. By the mid-1970s, he had stopped bathing entirely. He lived on almost nothing, some days on nothing at all. The man who had spent his entire life trying to keep contamination out had slowly, without ever meaning to, become the very thing he had always feared the most. And when he finally died in 1976...
I say several. I want to correct that. That's absolutely not true. We have only evidence that the kidney played out. Now, I'm sure when we get the looking, we'll find that there was a little here and a little there, but grossly, the only evidence was that the kidneys just had gotten the changes that one would expect.
Official records pointed to kidney failure as the cause, but the real collapse behind that diagnosis had been quietly building for 30 straight years. He left no will that anyone could ever locate. A fortune worth $2.5 billion sat without an owner, without any clear direction, eventually claimed by distant cousins who had not spoken to him in decades. Then, weeks after his death, a handwritten document surfaced claiming to leave a significant portion of that fortune to a gas station worker in rural Utah, who told reporters he had once picked up a strange, disheveled old man walking along a desert highway. It sounded like fiction. It was fiction. A court eventually ruled the document a forgery, but the case exposed something far more unsettling than any amount of money ever could. It exposed exactly how completely the world's most famous man had vanished from his own life long before his body ever followed. One piece of what he built did somehow survive him, almost by accident. A medical research foundation he created decades earlier, largely as a way to shield his fortune from taxes, now quietly funds more scientific research than almost any private organization in the entire country. He never intended for that to become his legacy. And yet, in many ways, it is the only part of his entire empire that still does real good in the world today. Everything else, the airline, the film studio, the hotels along the Strip, even the original patent that started it all, is gone now, sold off, shut down, or simply forgotten. What remains instead is a warning that the same obsession capable of building genius, when left with no limit and no one strong enough to ever say stop, can just as easily build a prison around the very person who created it. And in the next story, we go back even further to a completely different kind of empire, one built not on oil or airplanes, but on a single deception so convincing it fooled an entire nation for years, until one careless mistake brought the whole thing crashing down in a single afternoon.